Hello, so today we are going to try to implement xState completely from scratch in our Vue 3 application. For this, I went to StackBlitz and I will just create a new Vue application completely from scratch by clicking on Vue. Now we of course need to wait. So in this example, we won't need the hello world. So I can just rename it to something else. And we can delete the complete code entirely. So we don't need any styles. We can leave this here for now, but we will rename it to xState. And if we go to the app, now we can also say xState component, xState. And as well in here, we are going to implement the xState component. So our xState component cannot do anything for now, but we will change this in a minute. First, we will need some dependencies. So we can click here and just add xState as our dependency, and as well as xState inspect. And it also requires some other dependencies which we will also install. So once we got this in place, we can go to our main package, and at first we are going to import the xState inspect method from the visual debugging tool for xState. This will be really awesome. Once we have it imported, we can inspect the app. You will set iframe to false. That's how it's going to open this in a new window. So what's not working? Inspect is not defined. Inspect. So problem fixed. Now we have a new window, a new tab, which is open for us, which will stay empty for now. And this is how we can see that xState is connecting to our app. For the second part, we will start to implement xState fetching machine in our component, so we can use it in the template. So I will create a simple fetching machine. This will be a xState machine, and xState machines take some options. It has by default an ID. We need to give it a name. And in the second part, we need to provide some states. And our states will be as following. So whenever we have a promise and we fetch something from the backend, from the API, first the promise is in the idle state. And the idle state basically does nothing. Then whenever we execute the call, we execute the promise, then it's in the pending state. And once we have the pending state, it can resolve either to success or rejected. So we have success and rejected. So now we have all the states in place. We need to specify the initial state. And our initial state is idle. So, okay. Now we are missing a comma. Once we have this in place, we need to import the machine from xState. And we also need to run the machine in our component. So to make use of this machine, we need to call the interpret function. from xState library. And for this, we will use a setup method. And inside the setup method, we are going to interpret our machine. So we will take the, oh, I have a typo, fetching machine. So we are going to interpret this fetching machine, and we are also going to start the machine. The interpret method returns us a service, which we can use and where we can also subscribe to. So we are going to first create a shallow ref. From the composition API, and we will put the service state, the internal service state to this, so we can return it to the template. So once this is done, we need to return this as a state, and it should be available in our template. So in here we can type state, and what is left is we need to import the shallow ref from view. So once we have this in place, we can just show our default value. The value of the state is not defined because of course we need to subscribe to the service first. So on mounted, we are going to subscribe to the service and change the state whenever the state is changed. So it's done in xState pretty easily. We have the service, and the service has an on transition event, and this event receives a new state. It's kind of like a watch function. And this new state will be applied to the state we have in the app. So now we need also import the onMounted hook. And if we refresh now, oh, we have something xState view on line 6. Yeah, we are missing a dot. We're having a dot too much here and here. So once we refresh it, do I import this component correctly? Yeah, we can see this. So the state is also going through. And now this fetching machine should actually work. Now let's add some options and say it's set the DevTools to true so we can see it in our inspector. So it's still connecting. So it looks like we have an issue somewhere. Let's inspect the code. Like, really, what can go wrong, right? So if we check the console, we can see that, what can we see? Let's check it. So we have the state in here. The xState is starting, tries to connect it. And state was accessed during render, but it's not defined in the instance. Oh, we have a setO, but we need a setup, right? And we have also a typo because typing is the most difficult part. Interpret. This is really difficult. I don't know how the people can do live coding without typing mistakes. So now it has started and we have the idle, pending, success, and rejected. So once we have it, we can just always show the state in here, and we will see also how it behaves. So by default, our component starts in the idle state, and we can see here on the right. So how do we get from the idle to pending or success and rejected? This will be the next step, and we will implement some events which we can execute. And the first one will be how we can go from idle to pending. For this, we will create a new event, and this event will be called fetch. And after the fetch is called, we will go to the pending state. So once we go to the pending state, we need somehow to call the promise, right? We need to execute, and we can see the action here. We can really go from here, and then our application changes to pending state. Inside our pending state, we will need to invoke a promise. And this is done by adding an invoke in here in the pending state. And in this invoke, it takes a source, and this must be a function. It can be a promise, observable, or another machine. And in here, we will do the fetch call to our data. Once the fetch is done, it has two internal events which can be triggered by the machine internally. And this is onDone event. So whenever onDone event happening, we need to go to success. So the target of this will be success, and on error, we go to reject. So whenever this happens, it should go to this states, and it should be totally fine, right? So let's implement how we can implement this fetch data. So this fetch data could live in here. So we can just execute a fetch call, and for this demo purpose, let's go like to JSON dummy API and get some posts. So in here, okay, I'll get some to-dos because we like to-dos. So let's call some to-dos. So now, whenever we execute the pending state, we can see in the xState that the pending, when it's done, it goes to success, and when the error is happening, then it goes to reject. Let's try if it works. So if we click now in here, fetch, the promise is executed, and it tells us that it's done, and we can also see what's inside of our promise. So our current context is undefined, and we can see what kind of event have happened in our application, and we can also see the transition diagram where we see the time when something happened. So this is very useful once you need to debug the machine. But it's not done. So basically we don't get any data back yet. So it means whenever the fetch is successful, we need to execute some functions, right? We need to execute some actions, right? And this is done in xState by calling the actions. And in here, we can just provide a new function, and they usually take a context and the event. What is context? Context is the current data on the machine, and it's just all the data which you can get from the API, for example, right? This is not state. This is just data, because state is finite and data is not. So once we get the content function, we need to assign it, and for this we will call the assign function. This will make sure that this is called in the right moment, and we can also import this from the xState. Once we have the assign, we can, assign, we can return the new context. And in our case, we have to-dos, right? We have an object with to-dos, and we will set the event data to to-dos, because this is where the data lives on the response. So once we have it here, we can put to-dos, and by default, this will be an empty array, right? So now I'm missing a comma somewhere, and this is on line 45, but this is not true. So on done, context, to-do. Oh, I'm missing a bracket, not a comma. So, and we can also like show the data which we get back from the server. So currently we should have an empty array if we don't have data, and this is located on the state context, and we can see to-dos is empty. So we can also invoke the promise in here, and now we have an object response because we get a response back and not our data. So before we do this, we need to convert it to probably to JSON. Now it's a promise. So I think it will be better if we do this in the then call. So we get the response back, and then we need to return response JSON, right? So this is how we know that this is resolved. Now we do ta-da, and we get our posts, and it says we are in the success state. So it means this was successful, and we go to the success state. All we need to do is now to render our list, and we can do this simply by making a v-for loop, and we do like to-do in to-do state context, and of course we will need a key in here, key to-do ID, and in here we will just display the to-do title, right? Because this is all we need. And of course, we should only display the list if we have something when the data is loaded, right? For this, we will have the state matches function. And it could be any object representation or string representation of the current state. So we have a success in here. So if the state matches success, we'll show the list, and else we'll show a loading message. And we will do this by simply writing loading ... We can copy the if statement and make sure that this is only shown when the data is pending, when the promise is pending, right? We can now hide the context, and we will also need some kind of button in the front end to see this in action. For this, we will just add a simple button, and this button will emit a send event, click, send, and the send event takes one argument by default, and this is usually an event which we specify on the machine. So now we have a fetch button, and we have the fetch in here, fetch. So whenever we click the fetch, send is not a function. Of course, send is not a function because we need to export this. We can export the send function from the service. So send function is service send, and we can fetch it. Fetch. So now something weird is happening. Why we don't see anything? And state context. So we are in the success. We can see it in here. So called user ID. So we have a to-dos on the context. So we cannot just loop over the context, of course. And now let's remove this. Cancel. I don't want to save my xState. And Ta-da! Now we have all the titles on here, and we can see that we landed in the success message. But what if we want to refetch the data once we are in the success message? We can basically copy the fetch function and just put it in the success message, and we don't need even to copy it. We can always refetch it, and it will always get the latest data. Because whenever we fetch, it will reset the current context and set the new data to the context. If you need to append data, you have to specify a different function, right? So what if we have some error when it's happening? So currently, if we fetch and we get the to-dos like 404, this is not right? So first, we need to kind of implement an error, a network error. So if the response is okay, right? If response is okay, then we return the response. Otherwise, we will throw something that it's not okay, right? And for this, we will use an early return statement, and we'll return the response.json only after it. So if the response is not okay, we can throw a new error, like throw new error and say, oops, right? So this will be our message. So whenever, and of course, we don't need to do anything else. Whenever we fetch now, it says rejected, right? Because something wrong has happened. So whenever the rejected has happened, we need to implement another action. And for this, we just copy and paste it. And we will do the same, but we will show the message in here. Message. And this message will live also on the context. And by default, it will be empty. So once we have the message, we can check and display the message in here. And we say context, state context to-dos. And now we will show the message. And this will only be shown if we have an error actually. So for this, we need to copy the reject state, right? And only show this once we have a rejected. So oops, now we get the error and we have it written in here. So whenever our fetch happens, we need some kind of opportunity to refetch. And currently when I press a fetch button, it works only on idle. But we can make it also work, and we can also make it work on reject. And now if we can see, whenever we click fetch on reject, then this function will be refetched, and then we end up again in the done state or success state. Currently, we will always end up in the rejected state because our call is broken. We have a typo. It's called to-dos. And yeah. So this is how you can visualize code in xState and use it already today without waiting for xState library to implement, to update all the bindings to Vue 3. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, you can check more example on xState on the official docs. You'll find a to-do application completely written in xState. And thank you for watching.